Would you like a spot of tea, love?
Yes, that would be lovely, darling. Presenting English in a Teacup, your guide to learning English one sip at a time. Hello there, and welcome to English in a Teacup, your guide to improving your spoken and written English one sip at a time. My name is Charlotte Prudent, and this week we continue with the topic of persuasion, how best to convince others of our ideas and opinions. To help us with this topic, Miss Finesstocrat will be holding her very own radio show as an agony aunt. But what exactly is an agony aunt? Well, it is someone, usually a professional, who gives advice to others to help them solve their personal problems. Sometimes people write into a newspaper or magazine with their dilemmas. Other times it can be to a TV program or radio chat show. We will be looking at some typical questions people send to agony aunts, and these questions all have something in common. They all contain examples of phrasal verbs. After studying the phrasal verbs, we will listen to Miss Finesstocrat as she tries to give answers to these questions using persuasive words and phrases to offer the best advice. Trying to give advice in a sensitive and understanding way can be challenging, especially for someone like Miss Finesstocrat, who, as a fine English lady, has never cared much about helping anyone with their problems. How will she get on? Let's find out, but not before first taking a sip of tea. Now we can get started. Hello, darlings, and welcome to Tea Time Troubles. Here we sip our tea at the same time as we help solve your everyday problems. After all, there is no problem in the world that can't be solved with a lovely cup of tea. Let's start with our first problem, which comes from Jessica. Jessica says, I am 35 years old, and for the last 15 years I have been going from one bad relationship to another. Nice boys simply don't interest me. Can you tell me why I am always drawn to bad boys and what I can do to change my ways? Drawn to be attracted to. In the context of the problem, Jessica is attracted romantically to bad boys, but you can also be attracted to things without a romantic connotation. When looking for a job, you may be drawn to offers of managerial positions or executive roles, or when it comes to traveling, you may be drawn to holidays that include adventure or extreme sports. Now, let's listen to Miss Finesstocrat's advice. Well, darling, the heart wants what it wants. It seems that you are rather drawn to the promise of danger and adventure, which is why you always seem to choose the bad boys. Bad boys are like coffee. You know that an espresso machine is bad for you. All those cups of coffee will give you heart palpitations, sleepless nights, and terrible headaches. But as a compulsive coffee drinker, you simply can't stop yourself. But Jessica, I tell you, it's high time that you make a change. I highly recommend changing your coffee habits for something nice and healthy. If I were you, I would immediately ditch the coffee for a lovely cup of tea instead. Stop letting bad boys into your life and get a nice boy you can take home to your parents. So, in Miss Finesstocrat's response, she uses a lot of the expressions we have already seen in episode 2, when she was trying to sell the eye kettle to a customer. It's high time that you make a change. used when you are emphasizing the urgency of a situation. Remember, it is a structure that is followed by the past tense. It's high time that you stopped going out with bad boys. It's high time that I quit my job and looked for something new. I highly recommend changing your coffee habits for something nice and healthy. This is also an expression we have seen in the previous episode. I highly recommend or I strongly suggest, followed by 1. A noun or noun phrase. For example, I highly recommend this new dating app. 2. Verbing. I strongly suggest trying this new dating app. Or 3. A clause, subject plus verb. I highly recommend that you try this new dating app. If I were you, I would immediately ditch the coffee for a lovely cup of tea instead. If I were you, if I were in your position, always followed by a conditional. If I were you, I would accept the job offer. If I were you, I would ditch the drugs and take up mindfulness instead. Our next problem comes from David, who says, I'm in my 60s and single. Am I too old to hook up with new people? Hook up with, to meet in a casual or informal way. When I was in London, I hooked up with some friends and we went to the cinema. Be careful how you use this expression, as it could also mean to have casual sex with someone. I met this guy at the nightclub and we hooked up. So the meaning of hooked up or to hook up with someone is entirely based on context. Let's go back to Miss Finesstocrat. Oh, darling, God no. Age is merely a number, and as long as you and your bank account are healthy, there is always someone out there for you. Why don't you go to your local golf club and invite one of the single ladies for an afternoon on your boat with a bottle of champagne? Unless you don't have a boat. Well, David, if you don't have a boat, I'm sorry to say, but you, at your age, you will probably die, sad, alone, and worst of all, poor. Next question. Oh dear, perhaps not the best advice, but how does Miss Finesstocrat give suggestions? Why don't you go to your local golf club? Why don't you ring him to hook up? Just a date or casual sex? It's open to interpretation. Why don't you take a sabbatical and go traveling? Why don't we sell the house and move to the south? Next problem from Elisa. My son is dating a woman 20 years his junior. How do I get through to him that she's a gold digger? Let's go through some of the vocabulary here. A woman 20 years his junior. So, is a woman 20 years younger or older than Elisa's son? If you are someone's junior, you are younger than them. So, if Elisa's son is 50, the woman he is dating is 30, 20 years his junior. If it were the case that the woman was 20 years older than Elisa's son, we would say, my son is dating a woman 20 years his senior. Senior, older than him. Gold digger. Someone who is not in a relationship for love, but rather for economic benefits. Get through to. Make someone understand, make it clear to someone that something is the case. So, in summary, Elisa's son is in a relationship with a woman 20 years younger than him, his junior, and Elisa wants to know how she can make her son understand, how she can get through to him, that his girlfriend is only with him for his money. Interesting question. Let's see if Miss Finesstocrat can help her. terribly awful business. I remember such a situation happened to my cousin Emily. She hooked up with a man half her age, and in the month he had ditched her and taken everything. The greedy bastard had even taken her pedigree poodle. But on the other hand, I am someone who likes to believe that love still exists and is not dependent on age. You want to know my opinion? How about not getting involved, dear? Your son is old enough to know better. I would therefore advise you to leave your son to live his life and stop sticking your nose into his affairs. How about not getting involved? You can use how about in the same context as why don't you. Just remember that after how about, you need to use verbing. How about taking a few weeks holiday? Why don't you take a few weeks holiday? How about organizing a team building weekend? Why don't we organize a team building weekend? I would therefore advise you to. I would advise you plus infinitive. I would advise you to think long and hard about this question. I would advise you to see the doctor immediately. Let's listen to the last problem from Joseph. I'm really into this girl I met online, and we're going to meet up for the first time next week. How should I prepare myself? Be into. Like or fancy. If you are into someone, it means you like them, you are drawn to them romantically. If you are into something, it simply means you enjoy it. For example, I am really into horror films. I am into healthy eating and fitness. Meet up. Meet in a casual, informal way. In this case, it is clear it is just a date, compared to using hook up, where there is a slight sexual undertone. Let's hear what Miss Finesstocrat thinks about online dating. Online? What is wrong with young people nowadays? Well, first of all, you ought to try to meet people in the real world instead of behind a computer screen. But if you must insist on meeting strangers online, you'd better try your best to make a good first impression when you meet in real life. I suggest bringing a bouquet of red roses and a box of the finest tea. Actually, now that I think about it, online dating could be a more convenient way of meeting someone new, especially a rich husband. Okay, Joseph, write in again and tell me the name of this online dating website. The idea has suddenly become quite attractive. You ought to try to meet people in the real world instead of behind a computer screen. Ought to, a stronger version of the modal verb should or must, and generally considered more formal. You really ought to consider investing in Bitcoin. Parents ought not to hit their children. You'd better try your best to make a good impression when you meet in real life. You'd better or you had better, again, a stronger version of should, and often used as a warning. You'd better leave now or I'll call the police. You'd better eat your dinner or there will be no dessert. Once again, it seems Miss Finesstocrat hasn't quite found her vocation yet. But, as usual, she has left us with some very interesting words and phrases to help us with giving advice. And who knows, maybe taking up online dating will lead to something new and exciting in her life. Tune in next week when Miss Finesstocrat will be talking about her date at the cinema, and we will be learning new words and phrases to discuss films. In the meantime, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook, where we will be providing videos, quizzes, and new vocabulary for every episode in our podcast. See you next time for English in a Teacup, naturally served with a lovely spot of tea.